So thank you everyone for being here. I am the nonprofit coach, Elizabeth Finlayson, and I'm welcoming Jeffrey Wallk from the Value Enablement Group today. Thank you so much for being here for this topic on innovation. I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully, you guys can see this okay. Once I get it done, here we go. And there. Let me know if this is visible for everybody. Okay, so there's a lot that goes on in innovation. I'm going to try to create a little bit more context around the stuff that we call innovation, some of the terminology that's used, talk a little bit about, getting a pipeline of ideas to start to, drive growth and improvement, and, introduce a few simple concepts. And again, this is more of an intro and overview. There's a lot more detail that can go into any one of these topics. So I would ask everybody to feel free to ask questions, jump in with concerns or things that you've seen before, would like to discuss more. We'll try to get through everybody's perspectives because there's a lot of different content and richness around this whole subject. So the first thing I wanted to do was just talk a little bit about, innovation. A lot of people think, oh, I've got this great idea. And, this is an innovation. I just did something. And it's a little bit more complex than that. There's more to just coming up with an idea, because there's millions of ideas. There's no company that doesn't have new ideas. So if ideas were just the basis for innovation, every company would be innovative. The challenge is taking the ideas and actually creating new customer value. Okay, and so sometimes it's something that we do today, but it's a better way of doing it. So that creates new value. And we'll talk a little bit more about what is value, okay? There are two perspectives on value. And there are, the one that I typically refer to when I talk about value is the value of helping me get one or more jobs done. So for example, if I'm driving a car and I don't have to look down to see how fast I'm going in a certain speed zone, there's actually a heads-up display that allows me to keep my eyes on the road. That is addressing some of the jobs I'm trying to get done, not taking my eyes off the road, driving safely, making sure that I'm driving in a safe manner. All of those things are different jobs I'm trying to get done while I'm driving. And this one innovation addresses multiple jobs. So that's actually a very useful innovation, and you'll see that more and more in cars, and eventually it'll become a standard. So that's just one example. There are lots of little things that we take for granted and that are innovations that we have every day. And there are opportunities for innovation in products and services. And one of the things that's important to understand is that the idea of a product is the innovation process is the same whether it's a process, a product, or a service. A product is something that you actually hire to get a job done. A service is something that's offered to you to help you get a job done. And a process supports some of that in one manner or another. So when you're doing innovation, it's always about how it's helping you get one or more jobs done as it pertains to typically a customer. But I'm going to expand on, value a little bit more and the concept of where you can apply innovation, because it isn't always about something that you can monetize, because you can have innovation in terms of the things that you do in a company. We have a better way of communicating between teachers, and it makes them a lot more informed about things that are changing in the classroom. If we have to adjust for COVID, for example, we have a new process for communicating with parents and kids who are remote learning. And so those are all innovations potentially. They're not going to change the a transactional aspect of value in terms of we're going to charge people more. It's going to make our jobs easier to do, and that means we're going to be able to perform our jobs better, which means the customers are internal customers. And if we can make their jobs easier, we're going to be able to make them deliver more value to the customers they're serving. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So, you and I have spoken about this before. So when you use the term customer, that can be a student, a parent, it could be a homeless person if that's the client base you're serving in a nonprofit. So, is that broader, if I'm understanding it correctly?
Yeah, I'll use the term customer, whether it's internal, external. You'll hear sometimes people say you treat everybody like a customer, but this is the essence of what it means. And I'm going to expand a little bit more in terms of beyond customer in a few slides, because I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainability because there's opportunities for innovation there as well. So again, it's about creating something that's new, building something that's better, and it's always connected to value. That otherwise it's just an idea or it's an invention, okay?
So, but you're not defining value as necessarily increased revenue.
No, that's actually
Okay.
transactional exchange of value.
Okay.
Right, that's a great question. So there are a lot of times the temptation by accounting and finance is to assess value from a monetization perspective and a transactional. But if I can make, let's say, for example, a student learn more material with the way that we're teaching and conveying the knowledge, that's going to create more value for that student, which is going to make the program that much richer and more valuable. They may not pay you anymore, but it may be that more people recommend your program. And if it becomes more popular, more classrooms may want to use the approach you use, and it becomes something that can be institutionalized beyond the organization, if that makes sense.
Right. So in my terminology, I would call that value proposition. It improves that.
So without going too far into the semantics, the value proposition is the perspective that an individual has about the value. So for example, in the case of a student, they might perceive the classroom material much more valuable than maybe the parent. The parent just looks at it and says, hey, they learned something great. I don't really know this one way or another, but my kid seems happier. For them, it's inferential, but for the student, it's, they can definitely see much more value from their perspective.
Right.
If that helps.
For sure.
So it's actually a good question because it leads into how do you measure value, which is a little bit more complicated than and beyond what we want to do in this conversation. But this kind of touches in on how we actually measure value from an intrinsic perspective rather than from a transactional one. Okay, and that's something that actually I've done with a number of organizations, including government and educational organizations. It's always interesting to see the light go on when they see, oh my God, that's what that means.
Thank you.
Okay. So there's a few things I wanted to share over here. First of all, what we mean by innovation. As I said, it's not an idea or an invention. An idea is something that, hey, I think we should make cars more efficient. Okay, that's a good idea. The invention is, okay, I've created an electric motor that can run a vehicle. Okay, that's great. Now, we maybe figured out a different way of providing, power rather than relying on fossil fuels. All right, so you broke through some technical barriers. And now we can start to look at this and say, all right, but if we introduce that innovation, we want to say that the invention of the electric motor is great, But how am I going to get that into the marketplace when I know that there are so many different constraints around being able to change, the automobile, knowing that there's a lot of areas of uncertainty with this new invention, and we're not sure if we can get funding for it. That's sort of the Tesla, approach of how they broke through a lot of that. And some of that stuff is somewhat legendary by now, but we see these kinds of things every time you introduce something that's different and it's something that's new, getting funding for it, communicating it, and actually creating something that can be repeated and doing it on scale is where there's a lot of risk and uncertainty because there's things we haven't done before. But if you don't try to do that, you will never have achieved the success and the potential for that. A lot of people think that, when you have an invention, you just simply put it out there in the market and it's just instantly, successful and we've made a lot of money. The reality is there's a lot of loops and iterations and failure points that you never hear about. And those are the things that the innovators, if you will, have to continually push through. And so it's taking what you can imagine and actually embracing those failures, knowing that you believe in your invention, you believe in the ideas behind it, and that that it's going to solve some problems out there and create more value. So you have to be comfortable with uncertainty, and you have to be ready to embrace failure along the way. So if I can use the classroom example again, I've worked with some educators where we've introduced some changes in a classroom, and you can imagine the challenges that you can go to when you start to make changes in an institution. Never mind compliance and all that aside, there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of uncertainty, and you need champions to help you move this forward. And you need to build support along the way. Those are all rich topics for another conversation, but it isn't just a straight line, okay? So when we talk about innovation, it's important to not just say, well, we go to Gary because Gary's our idea guy. And Gary's always got the great, the best ideas. Maybe, but what you really want to do is, if you can, and you have the opportunity, is to try to build incentives across the entire organization. And anybody can come up with ideas. And that should be part of encouraging ideas of ways to do things better, new ways of delivering value, and solving problems in new ways. Those are all potential opportunities. Every one of those may solve one or more problems. The key is to build a discipline around that. One of the things that I did with one small organization is we actually involved the teachers and the students in an effort to come up with ideas to solve one or more problems in a classroom and make it more interactive, more useful, and more engaging. And so we used ideas that were generated from one or more of those structured ideation sessions with students and the teachers. And that made it much more inviting. We got much greater engagement from the kids, and the teachers were much more welcoming because they were part and parcel of it. It wasn't one teacher throwing an idea over the fence and saying, hey guys, what do you think? Because, well, they may embrace it. They may say, well, gee, nobody asked me. And so having everybody have some skin in the game, including, the participants, the kids, was really important because they all bought into it. So one of the golden rules around, HR in organizations is to, we focus a lot on R&R, which is responsibilities and, and the roles that they have in the organization. But another R&R is around rewarding and recognizing those who try, but even if they fail, as long as they're learning, the trying is really what it's about. And and I wrote about an article about this recently, but this is something that I've always tried to get people to understand. Failure to try will lead to certain failure. But if you at least try and fail, you have an opportunity to learn, and you're certainly going to at least be able to move beyond where you are today. Otherwise, we will never have moved anywhere from the current state to achieve. There are a lot of folks right now that are struggling with where their organizations are today. They can't get business because they're shut down, because things have changed, because the operational costs have become overbearing. And they're not sure what they can do. They may not be able to do anything differently about their current business model, but they need to try some different things. And are there some other ways that they can get, the services and products to the customers that they serve? So we're seeing, lots of restaurateurs trying to reinvent their delivery model. We're looking at people in transportation trying to rethink the approach for what it means to clean and secure areas. We're looking at people that are in not-for-profits, looking at new ways of creating interest and raising funds. And we're looking at education and healthcare transforming themselves into, okay, how do we still maintain relevancy and the value while not being able to be in person? And you're gonna see, things that worked and some things that don't work so good, but that's okay because they're trying. And that's the key. And it's important to not punish people for trying, but to reward them and recognize them for trying, because that's how we innovate. That's how we get further. And so again, in order to be an innovative organization and to build a pipeline, you really need to have HR encouraging and nurturing this stuff, okay? Which means they have to work with managers and executives and help them understand you don't get to that point unless you try. And it's interesting because if you look at some of the most successful companies that are built around innovation, if you ask them, what their culture is, their culture is, if it's absent of, fear. They embrace failure, but measured failure. They embrace people that are trying to do something better, to bring ideas, and actually they're helping those individuals actually invent and implement, okay? Because that's how you get it done. It's great to have 1,000 ideas, but if it's just coming down to the 5 or 6 people that have to implement it all the time, you'll never get that pipeline going. So everybody has to be part of that. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, a little bit more clarification around the term innovation. The term is used in many different ways, and I think it's sort of one of those that's been abused and misused in too many ways. The innovation really it doesn't really get there until you've delivered new value, new ways of addressing unmet or undermet needs for the customers and stakeholders you're trying to serve. And it's only when it becomes operationalized that it's truly an innovation. Otherwise, well, that was really an interesting electric motor, but it's never been implemented in a car. It's still an invention. And there's millions of inventions where there's IP, intellectual property, that's sitting out there in the patent office that have never been realized because they were interesting ideas. They were creative inventions, but they couldn't turn them into something that someone's going to use to address one or more desired outcomes. They couldn't figure out how to get it in the marketplace, or they couldn't figure out how to implement it properly and operationalize it. And so the reason innovation is hard is because you have to go through the entire life cycle to get it implemented and make it work. Okay? That's why it's hard. The rest of it is sort of like the easy part. It's not the ideas. The ideas are easy. It's actually making it operationalized so you can deliver new value. That's the key. So you asked an interesting term earlier, Elizabeth, about customer, and I wanted to expand a little bit more on the term customer and actually expand it to something that I call stakeholder. And this is something that's becoming more important as we go forward in the world, because you're hearing more information about environmental sustainability. You're hearing more about the impact on society and employees, and how changes come and go even around compliance and governance and how those impact everything. And there's a practice that's been gaining a lot more ground in the last few years, which is around sustainability. And sustainability involves environment, society, and the governance around how things are actually done and how you're protecting people from a compliance perspective. All three of those come into play, and there's a set of measures around that a lot of the Fortune 500s are starting to, follow. Many companies are looking at, and many organizations are becoming green and looking at ways to become more environmentally conscious because of climate change, which is all great. But when I talk about stakeholder, it's actually expanding to the customers, the partners that you work with, the vendors. So for example, if I'm providing, let's say, technology to an education center, I'm really a stakeholder because I need to know if there is something that I can do to deliver more value. And if you implement something which is a new process or a new way of reaching out, or you want to be able to reach out and engage, let's say, parents and students together, or support some kind of a collaborative work project among students, the tools that I'm providing as a vendor may need to change so that you can do that, which means I might need to help change some of the tools and introduce some new capabilities so that you can complete your innovation. Okay, and so that means there's a collaborative there. And in the same fashion that we're doing things with the environment, it isn't just about the waste that we create. It's about some other things that we might be doing that could make things more efficient, maybe not use as much fossil fuel, maybe things that can make it cheaper to actually run the building and facilities. And those are all things that can be part of innovation. And it may be that there are some things that we see through biomimicry of looking at what other species are doing that helps us think, hey, there are new ways of delivering value. If I wanted to come up with some kind of material that, let's say, was impervious to dirt and or fluids that would normally stick to it and ruin the material, those are bi-directional innovations. It helps reduce the amount of waste in the environment. It also allows me to use concepts that have been deployed in the environment, and I can reimagine them in material science to bring new capabilities in the marketplace. So when we talk about innovation and the stakeholders that might be impacted or participating in that delivery of that innovation, this is just asking folks to think more broadly. An example of this is some of the stuff that we're going through right now with COVID. Everyone's trying to figure out ways of covering their nose and their mouth. They may not have enough face masks. We're seeing people innovate in society, and they're coming up with new ways of doing it. Maybe sometimes they're engaging parents and kids. Sometimes you have people in these innovation labs that are coming up with new ways of using 3D printing to create masks and shields. So you're starting to see a larger participation of innovation. And so even when we are seeing new ways of engaging people on websites, you're going to see the way we're doing things today is kind of primitive compared to what's coming. Within maybe 10 years, you'll be able to interact with holographic images. So if I'm talking to Dave, Dave can actually be interacting with me. And wouldn't that be cool? Or let's say, for example, I wanted to run a classroom with some of the kids, but it's this new material. I'm not sure how they're going to receive it. I could actually have a virtual classroom with personas of 5 or 6 year old. I won't say how easy that is to make, but let's just assume we can do that. And then I could actually play it out, and I could gauge the response that are most likely within a few scenarios that had maybe been modeled. That's the kind of stuff that's coming in the future. And so when we talk about stakeholder involvement and innovation, it's going to continue to expand, and everybody becomes part of that. Go ahead.
So I have a question. Innovation as you define it here. So I'm a business of one. Is innovation itself a collaborative process? So would it, by its nature, the way you define it, involve these other stakeholders? Maybe in my case, it might be customers, it might be other partners, it might be, but it doesn't happen alone in a vacuum?
Yes. I think it used to be that a few people would come up with this great invention and everything was focused around the intellectual property. I mean, I've done some work in healthcare industry, and there's a tendency for everyone to say, okay, we've got this new molecule and, we're going to solve the world's problems. I'm like, okay, that maybe, but more and more, we're starting to see that there are crossovers in many different disciplines. And even drug delivery and drug manufacturing is going to change dramatically in the next 20 years. And it's going to involve multiple disciplines. It will no longer be the sole proprietorship of the pharma company. Okay, so it's going to change. And I think the same thing goes with many different disciplines. Okay, so these are all things that suggest we're going to have to learn how to collaborate more. And the notion of stakeholder is going to expand in ways we haven't anticipated. We actually see websites being created nowadays that have much more of an immersive experience. People call that digital transformation, what have you. And you have some of these bots and AI and machine learning that are trying to become more interactive. And in some cases, they do a good job. In other cases, it's like, boy, I'm tired of talking to, and I won't say it out loud because it's behind me and it'll just activate. But these are issues because, okay, how do those things learn how to become better at what they do? They're learning based on the responses. And so now, while it may be an early invention and innovation, it's still maturing and growing. And you as the customer, the patient, or maybe one of the employees or vendors, by interacting with it, are helping it improve. So you now become part of the maturation cycle and the loop back of ways to improve and drive continuous improvement and come up with new innovations within the technology platform. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody with that response? Feel free, because I mean, there's a lot going on here, I understand. So again, I think the same things that happen with education. We're going to start to see, and we already have the opportunity to start looking at visual feedback loops. You can tell when someone doesn't quite get it. Let's say we ask them to fill out some kind of a quiz after we've given them some information. And they kind of, fumble their way through it. They're not sure they really got it. That's a way for us to kind of get the sense of it. But do we have to wait for that? Or can we just see that they're kind of checking out? Meaning, okay, I think my topic is fascinating, but like 30% of the kids are losing eye contact or falling asleep. Maybe it's not the best content, or maybe the way I'm delivering it needs to be much more engaging. Okay, so like we teach history today, we have, you know, the dates and a few pictures and lots of, you know, events and so forth. But if you can experience history, oh my God, it's like, you know, you can just see how they can interact with it. If I can make history a video game, it's like, boy, wow. I mean, they can tell you more about history than I could ever tell you. So that's where these different mediums come into play. So the feedback loop and the interaction with people is going to be creating these bi-directional loops. Great question. Okay, so this is one definition for innovation. You can go to 1,000 different consultants and get 1,000 different responses, but this is just one. And this is how I look at it, because in my mind, it's always about delivering new value. Okay, now it may be that you have the same value and you've created something in a completely different way. You're delivering the same product or service, but you've done it something in the back end very differently, either because new technology or new ways of thinking, but the actual end value is the same. But remember, the stakeholders in this case are the people that are involved in creating it for the customers. So what you've done is you've created an innovation with your internal customers, your internal stakeholders, and or vendors and partners, and that together allowed you to create and deliver the same value, but maybe more efficiently. There's no difference to the customer who's consuming it. So, you know, again, you'll start to see this sort of thing happen more and more with some of the, you know, like behind every great, you know, man, there is a great team of people. And behind every great, you know, product or service, there is a whole different set of processes and capabilities. And sometimes you get a part of that and you get it out there and it's like, wow, that's great. But boy, if we could do it different ways, we could make it a lot more efficient. And that's how we can start to scale it and make it much more efficient. And we can, of course, improve our margins. And oh, by the way, we can reduce some of the frustrations. So, you know, in restaurants, for example, one of the biggest challenges is dealing with, you know, problems with the food delivery, the order taking, and confusion with the billing. Sometimes a simple innovation can make a huge difference for, let's say, the wait staff. Okay, same thing for teachers. A lot of times there's new information coming down and it's like, God, I wish they would have told me that beforehand. I could have made the adjustment halfway through and we didn't have to waste the time with the kids. And it's like, okay, is there a way for me to communicate that more effectively while they're delivering the classroom material? Okay, it didn't change the classroom material you delivered to the kids, but it changed the way that you are actually getting your job done. That's the new value. Okay, so I know we've turned a few different terms around here, but the challenge here is that context is everything, because innovation, oftentimes people refer to that as a noun. Okay, you know, it's like, here is my cell phone over here, if I can get this. Yeah, so this is my cell phone. Everybody looks at this as an innovation. Well, okay, the cell phone has a number of different capabilities that are consolidated into it. That is the innovation in terms of the service and the value I can get from it. If I'm somebody, and I'll use something that I think it was, I can't remember who mentioned before, but somebody had mentioned earlier that, is that a value proposition? Well, if I'm somebody who just needs to, you know, let's say, get my email, and that's and answer the phone, this is probably not worth $1,000 because I only do two things with it. So the value proposition for me is, this is way overpriced. So maybe I don't need a phone with these capabilities. But if I wanted something that could take pictures and movies and record and do voice interpretation and serve the internet and which are, 20 different devices now, and maybe also hook it up to my patch, which regulates insulin for, my diabetes. Gosh, I mean, this thing saves my life. It saves me socially. It saves me professionally. It's the $1,000 is, it's a fraction of what, to me, the value proposition is worth. Okay, so context is everything. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do is talk a little bit about ideas, and that there is no shortage of ideas. Every company, everybody has ideas. It's not that when people say, well, I really want to talk to the marketing team because, they're always the guys with the best ideas. And I know Dave is a stellar example of that. So I'm just going to put him on a pedestal again. But when we talk about ideas, there's no idea is, even if somebody says, well, we can't use that, or somebody says, well, that's not a very good idea, you should never judge an idea unto itself, because there may be a concept behind that idea that says, you know what, maybe the way he was suggesting it isn't great, but that gave me another way of thinking about the problem. That is called lateral thinking, okay? And that's very powerful. It's a separate topic and another subject I can talk about for a long time, but every idea has value and has merit. The challenge is when someone comes to you and says, hey, I got this great idea for, a new pencil. Okay, looks interesting. It's $6 for the pencil. Okay, what problem are we trying to solve? I don't know. I just think it's a cool idea. It's like, well, it is a cool idea, but unless it's solving a problem, what's the value gap I'm trying to close? If you can't articulate that, it's another idea that goes on the shelf. It doesn't mean we throw it away, because we may come back at a future time and say, I remember John came to me with an idea about something about a pencil, and we're having an issue with, writing or capturing information. And the way his idea may still not work, but there was something about it that triggered a concept of another way we can approach this problem. What you want to be able to do is take an idea and look back at what problems they're trying to solve, and ask the people that are coming to you with an idea, what problem do you think we need to solve, and how important is that problem? Okay, that's really part and parcel of understanding, teasing back, what's the real value? Okay, so it's just something to think about. The best ideas solve multiple problems. Well, okay, I mean, the idea for a cell phone, when we didn't have a need for a cell phone, before they even knew what it could do, has continued to solve more and more problems. So it's sort of like the idea that keeps on giving. We're now starting to see something similar with cars. Cars used to be just getting us from point A to point B. And now they can do many things. They can transport materials. They can be used for, saving energy. They can be used for collaborating because we can all ride together. They can be used for entertainment now, more and more. They can be used to help us explore different places because they have GPS. And because we have access to all kinds of information, I can now leverage this platform of my phone, I wish you could, yep, and plug that into the car, and now the car is an extension of my phone. So you're starting to see people looking at ideas that can solve many things, many problems. We call that platforming, okay? And you're going to start to see more of that kind of thing come into play in healthcare, in the news media, how we consume news, and you're going to start to see new ways of keeping people informed, helping them get more and more things done. And so that's really where those ideas that can solve multiple problems become very valuable. And we call those multiplier effects, okay? Because they can solve many things and they can create multiples of value, okay? And again, ideas can come from any stakeholder. And if you can encourage that, that's tremendous. You can get it even from friends. You can get it from other people. You're always somebody who's always trying to solve problems and enjoys the idea of inventing new things. They're always listening for ways they can do things better, continually improve, and maybe new ways of delivering value to create inventions and deliver innovation. Okay, so today we don't always tap our employees and staff to do that, but this is where you want to go in the future, because this is going to keep you moving forward. It's going to engage everybody, and it's going to make it's going to turn you into a more proactive organization, and it's going to make it a lot more fun. So these things have it's built on participation, it's built on reciprocity, and it encourages collaboration. These are all the things that create optimism, hope, and it creates positive energy. And that's what you want in your organization. So I wanted to share just a brief overview of the innovation life cycle. I know we're already about 20 till, and I can go into a lot of detail on each of these things, but this is sort of the 7 steps. And you can combine these if you want to, but they're pretty much straightforward. And I've used the 7 I's just because it was convenient, but the identify is really where, it may be that you've identified an idea, but you need to go back and say, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? And then really understand, is that problem sitting by itself, or are there other problems that I can solve at the same time if I really think about that? And then you need to investigate what's the gap. I mean, I think it's a problem, but I've talked to, let's say, some of the customers and some of the other internal or external customers and some of our vendors, and they're like, it seems like, an unmet need, but I don't know how important that is. So maybe not, and it's like, okay, no big deal. But sometimes you go in there and you say, you know what, there's a huge opportunity. And just the little bit of investigation reveals that this might be worth pursuing. So let's take a look at what that idea was originally, or if a problem gets presented to you. And after you investigate it, now let's sit back and say, well, I can imagine a lot of different things we can do about that. How do we come up with, let's say if it's something that we really want to pursue and make it a new offering, we may not just want to come up with one idea. And we can start with something that's called brainstorming. So you get a lot of people in a room and, we'll sit there and come up with, a bunch of different ideas, and maybe we'll do a quick affinity analysis and say, okay, looks like everybody is thinking this is a good idea, or one or more of these things we should pursue. And that's a good start. But, sometimes it's like, yeah, we've had those brainstorming sessions before, and we get similar ideas and so forth. The ideas always seem like they're the same. We want something that's a lot bolder. Okay, well, maybe we need something that's a little bit more formal to generate those ideas, all right? So there are a number of different techniques like appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is something that is okay, let's imagine that you have a blank sheet. Imagine anything you want about how that might look if you're the customer, you're the stakeholder. How would you want this to work as a product, as a service? How would you want to feel about it? And it's giving them kind of like the drawing pad and saying, you tell me what your imagination is. You tell me what you'd like to see. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to apply formal techniques like lateral thinking, where you can actually identify a list of ideas, go back, figure out what concepts are behind those, generate more ideas, and then try to create more diverse ideas, so that some of them may be like, oh my God, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But you know what? That just gave me an interesting idea. Maybe we don't do it that way, but that triggered an idea for us to do it this way, and that became the one we chase after. And those are really fascinating to do. I've done this with engineers who, you know, they're a tough group. And oftentimes they're skeptical. And second of all, they've thought about this problem every which way is Sunday. And it's like, okay, well, maybe so, but let's see if we can come up with a few new ideas. And then when you generate a few hundred ideas after a couple of days, they're like, oh my God, we've got a whole pipeline and roadmap of things we could do to make a difference. Great. Some of these are quick wins and some of them are going to take years. Okay, that's getting into prioritization, building portfolios and chasing after it. But you at least now have enough from ideation to say, where do we want to create new inventions? Okay. And oftentimes, especially with product-based companies, a lot of times the inventions are with the information that's surrounding the product. A lot of times it's with the services, and oftentimes it's with the process we use to build the current products that we have today, and just doing it better. And by doing it better, it means it's so much, the quality has improved so much more. We have fewer problems and returns. Customers are happier, and just by making those few changes, it's like we've transformed our supply chain, and we've transformed customer value. Those go a huge long way, okay? And again, inventing something is one thing, but actually implementing it, that takes some time, and it can be very expensive depending on what it is. Even if you've got something out there, you still have to institute it to say, you know, okay, I've got 3 clients, 3 customers, or a few stakeholders that are using this, but getting it out into a wider audience, scaling that implementation and institutionalizing it, that's very tough. So an example, I'll use SpaceX because it was relevant. The goal for SpaceX isn't just to launch a rocket and say, oh boy, that was great. They are trying to focus on reusability. So it's one thing to say, okay, I've created a new rocket propulsion system, and that got us into space cheaper. And now I had to create something that was a reusable rocket propulsion system. Okay, that was difficult, but we managed to do it. Now I want to create a fleet of those. Wow. I have to go back and maybe reinvent and come back with my staff and vendors and say, I need some new ideas for how I can scale this, because what I designed for the initial implementation was great, but I can only do a couple of those. If I want to do this en masse, I have to redesign whole parts of it. That was the Tesla challenge, because when they said, okay, we've got this new Model 3, that's great. Everybody was like $35,000 for an electric car that was, you know, could zip around at 0.2 seconds and all that stuff. That's wonderful, but I need to be able to create 10,000 of these things every month, and they have to be perfect. Holy cow, I had to reinvent the factory. And even if I do that, in order to institutionalize this, I have to make sure there's enough chargers out there, because, oh my God, all of a sudden everybody's driving electric cars. So you can see that as you get further down the pipeline, it gets a little harder. Okay, even if I was implementing some new ways of teaching students, it's one thing to do that, my own classroom. I have a little bit more autonomy. If I try to get other teachers to do something similar, well, that's a little more challenging. So now I'm trying to institutionalize it across the school. If I want to do it across the entire district or the state or the country, because this is a better way of teaching, well, there may be a few challenges there. But again, in each one of these things, you're going to see more of that cycle through. So again, these are typically the stages that we go through. A lot of people get past the imagination, or they ideate through a couple of different ideas. A few smart people may invent something, and then they sort of disappear, and it's up to the hard work over here. The idea was great, but the idea is only useful if you can implement it and institutionalize it. That is where you can start to create scale and make a difference. You can own marketplaces if you do this right. So again, I don't know if there's time to go through all of this stuff over here. This is more talking about some of the same concepts. What I want to do is just expand a little bit on ideation and innovation. These are a few of the challenges with, okay, I've got all these great ideas coming from, let's say, some of my staff. Where do I put this stuff? I need some way of capturing it. Well, I've got hundreds of ideas. A lot of them seem very similar. How do I align these things? Okay, well, this is where it takes a little bit more effort. In a large company, this can, we can't hire new FTEs, full-time equivalents and resources just to capture ideas, because we may only use a few of them. But if you realize the value of institutionalizing and creating an innovation pipeline, this pays for itself many times over. You don't need to hit it out of the park every time. All you have to do is hit a couple of guys around the base, move them around a couple of times, and suddenly you've changed your market. And that's what it's all about. So there's, I'm not sure I had, this is sort of a simplistic overview of eventually getting towards an innovation pipeline. And ultimately, it's not about saying we don't want to use all these different ideas. We still want to warehouse them, because when you can warehouse those ideas, most new inventions are built on the shoulders of others. We hear that all the time. Most technologies are built on the shoulders of others. It's just how we've packaged it, okay? Everything that's in the cell phone, there's nothing new in there. It's just a different way of packaging it. Healthcare is the same way. We're going to find different ways of packaging it. We're going to find some new inventions and new ways of doing things, for sure. Same thing with education. Same thing with even like, some friends of mine that are in the travel agency. I mean, right now, COVID is like, no one's traveling. So they're starving and saying, gee, how do I get business going? Right now, the technology isn't quite there, but, right today, when we talk about travel is about taking people to new destinations. It's about new experiences. It's about, eating new foods and meeting new people and seeing things differently. Well, with virtual technologies and with the access to different participants and partners, you can create those same experiences even if you don't travel there. And that's just saying that for those that can't afford to travel to someplace, can we bring those same experiences to their feet? It's a different way of thinking about what are you trying to do when you go on travel and vacation. Some things you can't replace, but some of the experiential aspect is what you're trying to duplicate. And that's where you can start to invent new ways of delivering value. So all this happens because you have champions in organizations that keep this going. You have sponsors from above to make sure it's funded properly. And you have mentors to help people along the way. Any questions about any of the topics that I've just covered? Again, it's a lot of material. There's a whole nother part of the deck that that gets into much more detail, but I wanted to just kind of go through the life cycle, talk a little bit about what innovation is, and that it is a series of stages to actually take ideas that are solving problems to deliver new value for one or more stakeholders. That's really the idea. And if you can start to create a functioning pipeline, get that first turn of the flywheel, so to speak, where you can get a few of these ideas through, you can energize the organization. And if you engage people, what Elizabeth was saying before, that's that participatory model, that's the collaboration. The more people that can get involved, the richer the ideas, the more engagement you have, the easier it is to get these things done, because sometimes it takes a village, sometimes it takes a city or a nation to make change happen. We're about to see some of that unfold in front of us. The old ways of changing aren't going to work. We need to figure out new ways of engaging and collaborating to affect change on a social level. So hopefully this was somewhat helpful. I can talk about much more detail in any one of these segments. And, if folks are interested, feel free to contact me offline. I'm happy to talk further about it and work with organizations if that's something that they want to start to, ignite some of that within. One of the things I'll just leave everybody with is a quote that I got from a scientist that I used to work with years ago from Australia. And he was just a charming guy and he was really brilliant. He said, he wrote a white paper about innovation, and we had talked about this for a long time. And he said that if you're not innovating, you're going to evaporate. And his tagline was innovate or evaporate. And I think given the amount of change and uncertainty, I think this is a good way to think about it. So, questions, thoughts from anybody? If it's overwhelming, let me know. Let me know if there's questions that you have that you'd like me to answer. Happy to help.
Yeah, I'd love for people to jump on and ask some questions. I know some people came on a little bit late, so those of you joining from phone, please feel free to jump in and ask a couple of questions.
Hi, Jeffrey. Just wanted to ask, and I understand that sometimes that you have teams of different people working in an organization in your flow chart. But like Elizabeth, I find myself as a smaller team in what I do. Would you be able to tell either a percentage of how much resources should be used toward the time of innovation or focusing on innovation versus the normal schedule of a routine that you currently do in your organization?
Well, a lot of it depends on what my goals and objectives are, let's say in an organization. If one of the goals is to address, let's say, growth, and as an organization, we're stuck, or we're coming up against COVID, we have to reinvent ourselves because what we've been doing isn't going to work in the new normal, whatever that means. It may be that, we might need to spend 20 or 30% of our time to get ourselves out, or maybe all of our time because we're not getting any sales. It depends on the situation. If it's a product that we want to bring to the marketplace because somebody just came up with a completely new way of delivering value, and they're going to take, our product is like 5x the cost of what theirs is, and theirs does it for a fraction, and most people seem pretty happy with it. I got to rethink my product. I got to rethink what I've done with my product and if I've over-engineered the delivery of the value. Okay? So I think it depends on the sense of urgency, and it doesn't mean you have to do it by yourself. You can work with vendors, you can work with partners, you can work with associates in your network, because I think engaging them as well creates new partnerships and opportunities for the future.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Anyone else for questions while we have like 2 more minutes? I was going to say one of the things that what you're saying reminded me of. So I won't give the name of the organization, but I'll say that I worked at some place that we would fondly refer to as a crazy puppet theater. And so idea generation and innovation were not a problem there. But it was really interesting because the artists would all get around and everyone's throwing out all these ideas. And I remember I had a lot of admiration for the person on the producing team who would take that and make them into something that had budgets and structure and timelines. And I remember asking her about her work and how it worked. And I remember she said, well, it works like this. They'll go through and someone will say, what if we dropped eggs on the audience? And then she'd say, what if they were feathers? And then they were like, oh, feathers.
Right.
And so some of the ideas were really outlandish, but none of them were bad and none of them were written off. And then she was able to then translate that into something more workable. And so it was a really good lesson for me that like someone who says, let's drop eggs on the audience is not crazy and that there's gold in there.
Right. Actually, there's a famous story and a summary report that came out of the 1980s Olympics because I think it was Peter Uberoff who was the one who ran that. He basically brought in experts on lateral thinking to help them come up with a way to make the innovation, to bring innovation in the Olympics so that they can make it profitable for the first time, because it's always a losing proposition. And as far as I remember, don't quote me on this, I believe that was the only time that the Olympics were ever shown a profit. And so it does work. So yeah, great story.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining on today's call. I know we were at time, but I want to say for those of you that are interested in contacting Jeffrey or me about anything, or anyone on this call, there's great people on here. You can shoot me an email. I think most of you have my contact information and my cell phone, 773-615-1938. I will route anything over to Jeffrey. I know we don't have a final slide up, so yes, thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
You're welcome. Stay safe, everybody, and happy ideating and inventing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you.